Dr. Meltzer, you referenced just a moment ago about the cost of Medicare for patients in the last months, even weeks of life. I'll just tell you, as somebody who practiced medicine for a number of years, the principal problem we have there is a lack of transparency on the part of the patient. They don't tell us when that last 2 weeks begins, so it makes it very, very difficult for us to balance our decisions. But along that line, you talk about the cost drivers contained within Medicare and Medicaid, and you talked about perhaps changing things so that they don't take away future benefits. I will submit within the health care realm, there is probably $1.3 trillion in immediate savings that will not take away future benefits, and that would be to delay the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which no one seems to seriously consider when they have deficit commissions or when they talk to the president. Is that something that this Congress should take under serious consideration?
Yes.
Thank you. We also talked, and this is for any one of you, talked a great deal about cash on the sidelines. I've talked to a number of my community bankers, not just the August recess, but going back this past year and a little bit longer, and the community bankers tell me that they're hampered by the fact that they must keep their loan-to-deposit ratio under 80%, or they'll invite a visit from some type of bank examiner, and that visit may not be pleasant. So they take pains to not go that last, to not touch that last 20%, and as a consequence, they're not making money on that 20% of deposits. The community is deprived of the loans that those 20% of deposits could create. Do any one of you have a sense that that's a bigger problem than what's been talked about before?
If I may comment, I think that is a problem. I think probably depressed lending by community banks is one factor holding back the recovery, and perhaps regulators could change their attitude a little bit, or think of creative ways to encourage lending and perhaps help recapitalize community banks.
But we've kind of gone the other way in the past 18 to 24 months, and rather than making the regulations, perhaps clarifying them even, we've made them more obscure, and we've, as has been previously mentioned, we've frightened people with what is the future regulatory environment that they're going to encounter. And Dr. Metzler, is that one of the reasons this cash is staying on the sidelines?
That's one of the reasons. That is generally regulation. As Speaker Boehner said so well in his speech the other day, you know, you can move your plant to China, but you can't move it to South Carolina. Now, that sounds funny, but at the same time, it tells us a serious thing about what regulation does to the attitudes of businessmen.
Well, you know, and we're talking right now, and the President's talking about raising taxes to create jobs, and yet this is the same White House that just this weekend said that Lockheed and Fort Worth can't sell F-16s to Taiwan, that their National Labor Relations Board said you can't build Boeing aircraft in South Carolina, and American Airlines, the biggest jet purchase in the history of the country probably, is buying non-Boeing products for perhaps the first time in their company's history. American Airlines is buying non-American produced jets. The 8 to 18 power plants that are going to close in Texas on January 1st because of the cross-state air pollution rule is going to be a significant detriment on jobs. Keystone Pipeline, argue the environmental effects one way or the other, but the White House simply will not make a decision whether they say yes or no. Drilling in the Arctic for Shell oil, they just will not make a decision. The problem, as I see it, is not that taxes are not high enough, it's that the White House is so risk-averse, it's afraid to act. Do any of you have an opinion about that?
I agree with that completely. I think you don't know what the future is going to be. Cash is your friend.
Just as a general sort of a comment, there's been so much focus in the last few years by policymakers in Washington on macroeconomics, misguided focus in certain ways, in my view. Microeconomics is extremely important. If you go back, for example, and look at what Margaret Thatcher did after a decade of stagnation in the 70s in Britain. Sure, she got the macroeconomics in order, but she did a heck of a lot on the microeconomic side. Tax reform, deregulation, privatization, all those things. It's hard to quantify the impact on the economy, but there's no doubt that fast growth economies, they're getting both the macro and microeconomics right.
I'd like to second that. I worked with Mrs. Thatcher part of the time, or some of the time. She was a real leader. She was willing to make tough decisions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We're going to